Welcome everyone to DarkSky International's annual Under One Sky conference. It's continuing to be the single most popular DarkSky event globally. This year, we have 20 speakers and hosts from 20 countries. At the moment, the number of registrants stands at 918 and growing from 53 countries. The title of the conference speaks for itself. We all live under one sky, and that binds us all. It not only binds us all globally, it has also bound us to our ancestors over hundreds of generations. And this is what motivates us to protect this natural night sky for future generations so the chain of sharing continues. I'm Nalaini Davies, the current Vice President of DarkSky International. In this session, we'll have a couple of my colleagues speak, and then we have our keynote speaker, Leigh Ann Henion, with her most recent book, Night Magic: Adventures Among Glowworms, Moon Gardens, and Other Marvels of the Dark, which celebrates the natural night sky. First, let me give you an overview of the conference. Chris, you got the slide share? So the program has been designed, it's a great program, and it has been designed as a 24-hour conference right around the world. As the Earth turns around the sun, our conference will continue with it becoming more and more accessible for people in different parts of the world. So in this session, as I said earlier, there'll be a keynote speak and a couple of my colleagues will speak. It'll follow immediately into global networking. I encourage everyone to take part. This is the value of a global conference where you can meet your peers and people with similar interests. It'll be followed by the DarkSky Tourism Engagement Workshop after a short break. And then we move on to the first of the 3 regional stories and expert sessions. The first session will be in cover East and Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand. And it'll be followed by the second workshop, DarkSky Ecology Engagement Workshop. We then have a big break because it's night for most of us, and move on to the second regional stories and expert session, with Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India taking the lead there. DarkSky Safety Engagement Workshop follows. Then the third and the final regional stories and experts, South, Central, and North America, followed by the DarkSky Policy Engagement Workshop. And then the last part of the program celebrates our outstanding performers through DarkSky Award ceremony, followed by a DarkSky Awards virtual social hour, just to meet and engage with each other post-conference. And then there's a closing keynote and a send-off with Travis Nowitzki giving a talk on a nature photographer, giving a talk on his experiences, and his favorite thing to photograph is the night sky. So that's the program. Chris? I must draw your attention to the code of conduct because we want to provide a very respectful and safe environment to carry on our conversation. So we have the code of conduct, which is available to you to read, just to alert you to the standards that are expected of the participants. The other thing the conference offers, we want to make sure that everyone communicates easily, freely, and your voices are heard better. So we are offering a transcript captioning. Not only is that being offered, it's being offered translated in a number of languages. So if you click the CC icon at the bottom, you have that. In addition to that, you can chat to each other. We encourage you to chat and comment on the talks and whatever else you wish to share. But if you want to ask a question, then there's a separate channel for that. It's a quick Q&A feature in which you submit your questions, not in the chat feature. And then finally, we'd encourage you to say hello to each other and just tell everyone where you're tuning in from. I can already see people from my part of the world. I'm in Auckland, New Zealand, so I can see people from Oceania, USA, Saudi Arabia, Germany, right around the globe, which is what this conference is designed to do. And the next thing I'd like you to advise you is about getting some kind of conference t-shirt or some merchandise, partly as a souvenir from the conference, but it also is another way for you to support the DarkSky International mission. I'll move on to, is there another slide, Chris? Yeah. I'll now pass the conversation on to Tom Reinert. He's our current president of DarkSky International, leading the organization since 2023. And he needs no introduction to most of you. He's an environmental activist, and currently he's fighting to reduce light pollution. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Nalani. Hello, I am Tom Reinert, president of DarkSky International. And on behalf of our entire DarkSky International board, it is my pleasure welcoming you to the Under One Sky conference. This conference provides each of us with an invaluable opportunity to learn from our fellow advocates around the world and gain new ideas and approaches for fighting light pollution. At the outset, I would like to suggest one such idea, that in our outreach and advocacy, we talk less about light pollution. Now, that might sound strange, since light pollution is real, it is even measurable, and it is fighting light pollution that is our common cause. But I am a lawyer by training, and I understand that the language you use to define a problem can be important on whether your approach to solving it prevails. In outreach, I have learned that light pollution often is not an effective term for convincing people to act. The issue is that the term light pollution neither suggests the cause nor the solution to the problem. Let me suggest three alternatives: smart lighting, responsible lighting, and sustainable lighting. Smart lighting suggests that the cause of light pollution is, in fact, stupid lighting, or more politely, I'll use the term mindless lighting. Smart lighting also points us towards the new technology solutions for lighting in ways that pollute less. The major cause of light pollution, in my view, is people not even thinking about why or how they are using light. The 5 lighting principles are so effective because they don't dictate a solution, but provide a roadmap for how people should think about installing and using light fixtures. The term responsible lighting underscores that when we use lighting, we should think about our responsibilities to ourselves, our own health, to our neighbors, and the natural environment. Many of us became involved with DarkSky because of irresponsible neighbors who use lighting without thinking about others. Responsible lighting suggests an ethic of minimal impact on the environment. Finally, the term sustainable lighting focuses on the long-term impact of lighting and underscores the relationship of our cause to global warming. Sustainable lighting indicates that lighting, like all technology, must be used in a way that marshals resources wisely and minimizes environmental impact. Now, I recognize I have only spoken about English terms because English is my native language. But I ask that you consider the same approach in your native language. By moving away from language about pollution to language about lighting and good lighting, I hope that we can make more people understand the issue and support DarkSky International's work to solve the problem. Thank you all for your efforts around the world. Together, we can bring smart, responsible, and sustainable lighting to the entire world. Thank you. I would now like to turn it over to our exceptional executive director, Ruskin Hartley.
Well, thank you, Tom, for your words and your introduction, your encouragement to be careful with our use of language. It's a great sign. I wanted to continue the thanks by just thanking all the supporters and donors who make this work possible, enable us to have the staff, this wonderful staff that I get to work with, who are working behind the scenes to enable us to put together a conference like this to support our global community. And I also want to thank our thousands of volunteers and many of you who are joining us today who actually put a little bit more onto your ticket this time so that we could extend and pay that forward, and we could extend invitations to the conference to hundreds more people. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I wanted to start by asking a question. What do these, just realized I have a typo on my first slide. What does the Wilson Storm Petrel and the Hutton Shearwater have in common? And why am I opening our conference about dark skies and responsible outdoor lighting with this slide? This year, I've been fortunate to travel and visit with many dark sky members around the world. I've been to New Zealand and Chile recently, home to these incredible birds. A couple of things connect them. One is that these are both seabirds. They're seabirds that, in fact, no one knew where they nested until relatively recently. The Wilson storm petrel nests in the deserts of the Atacama. It nests inland, and it nests in crevices underneath the desert salt pans. Scientists looked down there and they saw these seabirds and what's going on. The Hutton shearwater nests in the mountains of Kaikoura in New Zealand, high up above the shores where it finds its home. Up in the alpine regions, in fact, the only seabird to do that. The other thing that connects them is they're both impacted by light pollution. They both are impacted by things that bird ornithologists call fallout events. The shearwater in Atacama was colliding with some of the coastal communities there and the lights there. And in Kaikoura, similarly, the birds, as they're flying down from their nests at 150 miles an hour, which is hard to believe, down to the coast, were colliding with the brightly lit community. In fact, in both areas, these seabirds and what was happening with them inspired their communities to act. In the Atacama Desert, they changed out some of their streetlights and they dramatically reduced the incidence of fallout. And as we saw in Kaikoura, that community has come together and in fact became one of the latest dark sky sanctuaries certified earlier this year. As one of New Zealand's latest dark sky places, which is why Nailani and I visited with them. We visited with them, and here you see, in fact, it is not a Huttons, it is an albatross, but you see the mountains in the distance. We joined a community meeting in an incredible museum that they had to talk about both the accomplishments that they'd achieved and also the challenges ahead as they look to extend those protections into their community, and how responsible outdoor lighting was going to be part of that solution. In fact, they'd made a start. A lot of the streetlights in their community have little shields that block the light from going into the ocean. So imagine my surprise when I returned to my hotel room that evening and noticed the streetlight outside my window was shining very brightly directly into my room. I, of course, was able to shut the curtains and get a good night's sleep, but what about all the other creatures that were out there that night? So our conference is an opportunity to come together and discuss some of these stories over the next 24 hours. As Nalani was saying, as the Earth is turning, we'll have the opportunity to engage with our fellow advocates around the world. We'll hear from leading practitioners, from ecologists, from people expert on lighting design and engineering, from public health advocates, from safety individuals, and from many of you sharing your stories like the stories I heard when I visited with the advocates in Chile, New Zealand, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and France over the course of the last 12 months. There'll be opportunities for you to connect directly with these people and to use the engagement platform to share your expertise, ask your questions, and join and strengthen this incredible community. One of the key things that's brought us together this year has been these incredible astronomical events that literally have been visible from so many parts of the world. And I started with this picture from one of my colleagues, a great astrophotographer, Betty Meyer Foote, who took this picture of the comet over the slopes of Kitt Peak here in Tucson. But what was remarkable to me about this is how it brought people together. I had my brother, who is not an astrophotographer, but happens to live in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, sending me a picture of the comet over the slopes of the hills that I love so much. And of course, I was able to share back a picture of the comet that I could see from my hometown here in Tucson, Arizona. It was dim, but it was visible to my eye. I didn't need to get a telescope out to look at it. In fact, pretty much the only places where you couldn't see the comet were the places that were impacted by the scourge of light pollution. Light pollution, the sky glow that's literally blotting out the stars overhead from the light trespass that's shining the light up into the sky where it's not needed, up into the windows of people trying to sleep at night as they get ready for the next day. And of course, from the glare, those glary headlamps, those glary streetlights, those glare bombs that are such a scourge and annoyance to many people around the world, the cumulative effect of those is blocking out the stars. So light pollution, as we know, is a global issue, right? Many of us are familiar with these statistics. More than 80% of people around the world live under light polluted skies. It covers more than 25% of the global land area. 22% of coastal regions are impacted by light pollution. And I was looking at some statistics recently. 77% of places that we have established as globally protected areas on the land and 57% of marine protected areas in the ocean are similarly impacted by light pollution. This is not just an impact on people. And as we learned from some work from Connie Walker, Chris Kyber, and others last year in this wonderful citizen science project, it is doubling every 8 years. It is essentially out of control. So how do we get here, right? The day-night cycle, dark nights and bright days, is the fundamental rhythm of our planet. It's the one constant in a planet that has seen so much change. The change started slowly at first as we came on the scene, sort of capturing firelight so we could extend our Earth work into the evening hours. And how did we get here? Las Vegas, one of the brightest spots on the planet. And what does it mean? There's a growing realization that we need natural darkness, right? There's some studies published just recently that brighter nights and darker days are a predictor of early mortality from this study in the UK. And it's not just bright light at night, but it's dim days, spending too much time during the indoors at day, too much light at night, both indoors. What we're doing to ourselves and to some degree what's going outside is impacting that. And Mario Moto, who many of us know, has been a former board member of DarkSky, recently published in the AMA, American Medical Association Journal of Ethics, a review entitled "We're All Healthier Under a Starry Sky." And we're going to hear from one wonderful author later, but another great book has been recently published by Lynn Peoples that really focuses on this, the impact of the disruption of this day-night cycle on our fundamental biology. And again, I want to emphasize, this is not just about light at night. This is what we're doing in the days by spending too much time under dim daylight conditions. The common link amongst all of this is disruption of that day-night cycle, of that light-dark cycle that's mediated by how bright the sun is during the day and how bright the moon is at night. It's disrupting our fundamental biological rhythms. And those are rhythms that we share with all living creatures. The suppression of melatonin is one of the key drivers in our biology. And as you can see from this, when we're lighting our outdoor environment, we're lighting at levels, orders of magnitude higher than even a full moon, let alone a dark moonless night. DarkSky was founded by astronomers, and we've come a long way under their leadership, but it's really clear and becoming increasingly clear with every passing paper that's published that light pollution is much more than a concern for astronomers. Light pollution is a key driver of this triple planetary crisis that's underway, where pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change are driving so many of the changes that our planet is seeing. Now, light pollution is not the sole cause, but light pollution is one of the causes. It is a source of pollution. It is directly impacting biodiversity, and through the excess energy that it's used, it's driving climate change. And unlike many of the other stressors, there are simple solutions. As Tom alluded to, responsible lighting is quite simple to do when you think about it. It's going to help us to restore natural darkness. So our principles, hopefully these are familiar to many of you, but it's start with natural darkness. Add light when it's needed. Think about what the use is. Target it down on the ground at the entrance where you need it. Use those lower levels so our eyes can adapt. Control it, dim it when there's fewer people around, and turn it off when there's no one there, and use those warmer colors. And by way of a brief example, I've got a little flashlight here, a little one flashlight, one battery flashlight, one battery in here, and I'm going to light my way with it. Imagine it's a street light. I'll get that going. Even from around the world, you can see the glare then. Now, how do we deal with this? This is, it's lighting my desk, but it's blinding everyone around me. Well, if I take a simple shield and put it on, now I can light my desk and suddenly you can see me. And so this is just a simple and a visual demonstration that the solution to light pollution is not necessarily turning off the lights all the time, but it is eliminating waste from the system and thinking about how to apply those principles in the practices that you have. So our solution is to reclaim natural darkness through responsible outdoor lighting. We have 3 areas that we're focused on: dark sky policy, dark sky approvals as recognition programs, and critically collaboration. We're really excited today to be launching one of our new policy tools. These are codes and statute templates, a long-time learning videos, a research library database, and a new recognition program to empower advocates around the world with simple, accurate tools that they can provide to their lawmakers so that the regulations and codes that can be adopted are understandable, but technically accurate, and will drive the change that we need to see. You can join a policy workshop with Brian Liebel, Rick Utting, and Yana Yakushima to learn more about that tomorrow. We're also expanding our DarkSky approved voluntary recognition programs. Next year, we'll be relaunching our fixture seal of approval program, our DarkSky approved luminaire, so you can buy a fixture, change it out. And we are also continuing to grow and build and strengthen our DarkSky Places program that has now 240 plus places certified around the world. 27 new places have been welcomed since we last met 12 months ago. And increasingly, our focus will be on this middle ground. How do you apply light in common situations like sports fields, like roadways? We have a new program launching later this year for ports and a new one for oil and gas facilities, these high intense lights, but how can you do it in a way that mitigates light pollution while creating safe, responsible lighting? We're also focused on building a community and strengthening our community of global advocates. We met over the last 12 months with a group to advise us on some of the themes here that we'll be launching next year. And the 4 themes were identified, were resonated with people. We're looking at dark skies and skies for indigenous and tribal rights, looking at the intersection with sustainable economic development, looking at the intersection between dark skies and our work with public health. And of course, the theme of this conference and the keynote, biodiversity and the environment. We're excited. Just a month ago, to start moving into this space by launching our Principles for Responsible Astrotourism, looking at the relationship between dark skies and sustainable development, particularly for rural communities. And how can you do that? How can you invite people in who are looking for these experiences? And how can you ensure that the values and places that they're coming to experience are protected long into the future? And we're delighted to be joined with the International Astronomy Union's Office for Astronomy for Development in launching this. The principles of responsible astrotourism are outlined here. You can join a workshop later after this with Sam Yukta from our board and others who will be talking a lot about the role that tourism and astrotourism can play in supporting the dark sky movement and giving people new reasons to protect the naturally dark skies overhead. So I'm excited for the next 24 hours. And I encourage everyone to listen and learn and actively participate in sessions and discussions. No, don't be quiet. Raise your voice. Find what resonates with you and find ways to get involved. I have some simple ideas for some practical steps. If you've got just a minute, what can you do, right? We often say, well, you can turn the porch light off before you go to bed, right? There's even something simpler. My parents, when I was growing up, would always say, no, close the curtains at night. No, the light from inside is going outside. Yes, that light I closed was the curtain I closed was to keep the street light from shining inside. But for the light from inside our buildings is one of the sources that's going outside. Such a simple step that we could all take tonight. If you got an hour, you can replace a fixture. You could install a new bulb, or you could go out and speak to a local group. In fact, one of my tasks this weekend doesn't show up very well because of the virtual background, but I have a DarkSky approved fixture that I plan to install and replace one of my old outdoor lights this weekend. And if you've got more time, you can get more involved in this wonderful DarkSky community. You can take action, you can create lasting change. We can really encourage you to use our templates and tools and resources and start to build a group and get a group active, involved in your local community. Again, join the policy workshop. You can learn a lot more about that tomorrow and find a community that can support you along that way. So many of the issues that we're facing as a global community and a local community these days are so hard to solve. And it's so hard to see the impact of the steps that we're taking. But light pollution is different. The solutions really are simple. And there's a direct response. You can see it when you take action. So our admonishment is to work together, to unite for the night, unite to protect the night. And that's our goal, and that's our charge over the next 24 hours and as we move into the next year together. I did want to close by acknowledging that we lost our co-founder, one of our co-founders this year, David Crawford. He was a professional astronomer here in Southern Arizona at Kitt Peak. And he joined forces with Tim Hunter and set about creating the organization that became DarkSky International. He was known for encouraging people to make friends, not enemies. And that really resonated with me in this moment in particular. I'm saying, really, that is our charge. We're going to solve this by bringing people into the movement, finding ways that we can work together to solve the issues and the problems that other people have, and expand and grow this. Because in the end of the day, as Tom alluded to, no one sets out in the morning seeking to pollute the night sky. And anyone who's been out under a naturally dark sky with the stars is inspired with the awe and wonder that is above. So thank you for joining us. I look forward to meeting with many of you over the next 24 hours as the world turns, and joining you at the wrap-up in just over 24 hours. So as I close, my last and wonderful task is to introduce our keynote speaker, Leigh Ann Henion. As Nilani said, she is New York Times bestselling author of many books, including her most recent book, Night Magic Adventures Among Glowworms, Moon Gardens, and Other Marvels of the Dark, which really is a celebration of all of the wonders of the world at night, all of the life that happens at night that, in a sense, has been ignored from the conservation story for so long because we tend to sleep at night and tend to be active during the day. I fell in love with Leigh Ann's book when her publishers shared a copy of the manuscript, and I knew as I got halfway through, said, we have to invite Leigh Ann to join our conference and kick off this year. And I was so grateful that when we reached out to her, she says yes. I'm also grateful that she was one of the families impacted by the hurricanes in the US recently. In fact, she just shared earlier that it was just very recently that her children were able to go back to school for the first time. So Leigh Ann, I'm really grateful, given everything that your community and your family has been through over the last few months, that you are able to take time out to share your stories and inspire us as we move into the next 24 hours. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. So I wrote a book called Night Magic, and it was inspired by a magazine article that I wrote about synchronous fireflies. So as night lovers, some of you might be familiar with synchronous fireflies. They're one of the most famous firefly species, arguably. And I went to see them in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I pitched my editor. I said, I want to go see these fireflies. They will be a form of hope rising in dark times, or something along those lines. And so I went, and they did feel hopeful. They were gorgeous. It was a fantastic experience. But what I realized while I was in the process of going out night after night was that the darkness itself was restorative, and that I had not really walked around in complete darkness without a flashlight very often in my life. So I learned so much from fireflies, including how light pollution is harmful for them. And I went on to, discover how it is harmful for pretty much every life form on the planet. But, I was also shocked to realize that I thought I knew about fireflies, but in fact, I didn't know much about fireflies at all. I'd seen news reports of the synchronous fireflies, which is why I wanted to go see them. But I kind of thought that they would just blink and then go dark, and blink and go dark. But actually, what synchronous fireflies do is sort of twinkle through the understory of the forest. It almost it looks like the northern lights actually in movement. And so these fireflies are communicating with the fireflies next to them. And it's really magnificent to behold. But in the process of learning about these fireflies, I found out that there are 2,500 firefly species around the world. So these are specific to my homeland of Southern Appalachia, but various parts of the world have, various species of fireflies, and each of these species has their own language, has their own blinking, their own patterns. And embarrassingly, when I set out, I knew about synchronous fireflies, but I had never heard of blue ghost fireflies, which are another firefly species that lives in my own home region. And you can only witness them for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year. The season is so short, it is so fleeting. If you don't catch them at just the right time and it's dependent on rainfall and temperature, just such a small window. But I was able to see these fireflies, and they are neon blue, and they can stay lit for up to 60 seconds. So we think of fireflies as blinking all the time, but these fireflies stay lit for so long that they almost appear to be writing messages along the forest floor when they move, because they just stay lit neon blue. So I decided to set out on a quest to learn more from varied species. And I thought, if I've learned so much from fireflies, what might I learn from salamanders and glowworms and moths? So one of the things I learned, this photograph is taken in an ephemeral pool, also known as vernal pools. And so I wasn't familiar with ephemeral pools at all before I started writing Night Magic. And come to find out, I've been surrounded by them for all my life. And maybe you have too, because ephemeral pools can actually be found around the world. They're most common in woodland habitats, but it's dependent. They're temporary pools that are created by snowmelts and rain, and this allows various species to breed there without worrying about fish eating their eggs. So these eggs are spotted salamander eggs, and spotted salamanders are fantastic, and they're sort of the species that I decided to kind of let lead me on my quest to spend time with salamanders. So they spend their entire lives underground, except for a few weeks each spring when they emerge to travel to these pools. And they lay eggs in these pools. They travel at night, lay their eggs. They hide under leaves because they want to find darkness. And the eggs are exposed to sunlight. So when they're exposed to sunlight, they actually photosynthesize. Over time, they turn green, because when a spotted salamander embryo develops its nervous system, at that moment, algae blooms inside of each of these eggs to give salamanders a boost of oxygen, and they're visibly green. So these creatures of the dark photosynthesize. And not only does this happen with their eggs, but fairly recently, scientists discovered that these animals actually have algae in their cells. So they carry this algae with them. And so little is known about how light pollution affects salamanders. We really don't know a whole lot about salamanders at all, because they live their lives, secretly underground. But we do know that light pollution can alter their ability to find these ancestral pools, because they do return year after year. And it's not just light pollution that disturbs them, it's actually the darkening of shadows created by light pollution. It creates a boundary, in a sense, that becomes confusing on the ground as they move through these areas of contrast. But around the world, there might be tens of thousands of ephemeral pools. There might be millions. The reality is nobody really knows, because most of the year they don't exist and they're hard to find. But a small ephemeral pool can actually hold more concentrated life than 50 surrounding acres. So if you live in a place where in spring you hear frogs coming from a certain direction, there is a chance that you have an ephemeral pool nearby. And this might be something that you would want to look into for your own environment, wherever you are. So over time, I really tried to focus not on what light pollution takes away, but rather on what darkness offers. Because when I wrote the firefly story for the Washington Post magazine, one of the things that was really surprising to me and led to the inspiration for this project was that readers started reaching out to me to tell me that the story that I had shared had inspired them to turn off their porch lights. And they were inspired because they wanted to find out what might be in their yard. So that was part of the inspiration. And I could have told them all of the ailments, of which there are so very many, but I think it was that sense of discovery that really moved people. And so I think that often we think of darkness as a void. It's presented as something is missing. It is associated with death. So I have really tried to tell a story that presents darkness as a cornucopia, an absolute wealth of life. Which it is. So owls, I would love to share with you also on the cover of the book, illustrator Zoe Keller has produced a gorgeous book. She has a screech owl on the cover. I was going to focus on another owl species, a rare owl species, but in the end, when I was working on this book, serendipitously, I ended up with some friends who had nesting screech owls in their neighborhood. So unbelievably, so their neighbor had put up an owl box, and he had been so excited to have this owl box to support these owls. And so they came. He waited and waited, and finally a pair of screech owls had come to his owl box, and they seemed to be settling in. But just as this happened, a street light went on in the neighborhood, and no one is quite sure if the street light disturbed the owls. They thought, hey, maybe this isn't the best place. But as soon as the street light went on, the owls fled. And they fled to my friend's yard, which thankfully had a natural nesting hole in a tree, where they were able to stay, and fledge. So it was a fantastic experience to be able to spend time with them. I learned a lot about owls. You know, I'd often wondered, why are owls connected to wisdom? In various cultures, in various parts of the world, owls have such different emotions and attached to them, positive, negative. But in the United States and kind of in a lot of Western culture, the owl is often associated with wisdom and courage, tracing back to Athena, because the owl was, you know, known as this creature of supreme night vision that allowed Athena to view truths that were not always clear to humans, but that other animals could perceive. So owls kind of have this reputation as translators of wisdom held in darkness in Western cultures because of this. One of the things that was really interesting to me about owls and over time is that I not only was learning about other animals, I was learning about my own relationship to night, even physiologically. You know, I think I had thought that my night vision develops, you know, in 20 minutes, 20 or 30 minutes in darkness, and I'd be ready to explore. In actuality, we do gain most of our night vision early on, but we incrementally gain night vision for hours. So I think it's really powerful and really exciting to share that if you have not pointedly spent time in darkness, kind of cultivating your own night vision, you might not know all of your powers, because we as animals are able to adapt over time, and often we aren't in situations that grant us that that time and that space to, you know, develop those abilities. Kind of moving through, another thing that I discovered in my quest were glowworms. So glowworms have always been something that I've thought, oh, I cannot wait. I would love to go to New Zealand to see the glowworms of New Zealand. So famous glowworms, neon blue, often in caves, but sometimes on forested paths. I had thought for years that I would love to travel around the world to see these glowworms. When I went out searching for fireflies, I realized that there are some things that darkness can reveal, even though we think of light as being the illumination of knowledge. Darkness has things that only it can reveal, and one of those are glowworms. So the glowworms of New Zealand still want to go, but I discovered that another place where neon blue glowworms, which are a type of fungus gnat larvae, because there are a lot of things in varied parts of the world that people call glowworms. Sometimes people even call firefly larvae glowworms, because a firefly larvae can glow in your yard underground for up to 2 years before you see them rise. But these are fungus gnat larvae, and cousins of these larvae live specifically in Southern Appalachia, my home region. And spoiler alert, I not only discovered and was able to witness these glowworms, Orphelia photonia is the species that is in my home region. I was able to find them in the next county over in great concentrations, and absolute spoiler alert, I ultimately found some in my own neighborhood. So on a road embankment that I have driven by with my headlights ablaze for 20 plus years, I found neon blue glowworms. Not many, but still, they were there, scattered along the ground like stars in the sky. And I had never known they were there, but they had been there the entire time. And so, time and again, I just continually discovered these wondrous things that were incredibly close to where I was, that had been there the entire time, kind of in a parallel universe, just outside my door. This is a landscape that I thought I knew very well. And kind of as it turns out, at night, I didn't know it well at all. So this really became a journey of discovering my own homelands, the place that I thought I knew best. Moths, for example, unsung heroes of pollination, I think they get a bad rap continually. Moths, often people will say, oh, they're so dull, or oh, they're after my clothes. But moths are, in addition to being incredibly important pollinators, they're gorgeous. They're so beautiful and diverse. And there are so many. They outnumber butterflies vastly. And all my life, I thought when I saw a caterpillar that I was looking at a butterfly in waiting. But in actuality, statistically, I've been looking at a moth in waiting. So that was really impactful. I was able to spend time with a lot of mothers, which is it's the moth equivalent of birders. We think of people going birding, but there are whole subcultures of people who go mothing, and I am now one of them. It's very exciting to witness all of the life that will come streaming out of darkness that all storylines typically present as a void of nothingness, and all of a sudden darkness just spills this glorious biodiversity. It's fantastic to witness. And probably the most famous caterpillar in North America is arguably the woolly worm, or in some regions called the woolly bear. And for all my life, I mean, I have known these caterpillars. They actually have festivals in honor of these caterpillars, but I never knew what the caterpillar became. And what it becomes is an Isabella tiger moth. And I thought maybe I was the only one, but when I did a poll of friends locally, in fact, they also were very familiar with these caterpillars, but they had no idea what the caterpillar became. And I think it's really just a testament to how focused we can get on the creatures that we share daylight with, and how little we know about our nocturnal neighbors. So bats were one of the creatures that I set out to learn more about. And as I say in the book, I feel like I've always been bat tolerant, but I set out to become bat positive, and it absolutely worked. I attended an event called Bat Blitz because it's hard to figure out how to responsibly have a close encounter with the bats. Bats are often seem terrifying in photographs because almost always they are photographed when they have a light in their face, which is disturbing them. a lot of people have told me that they don't like moths, but they love butterflies. And one of the reasons that they'll often present is that, moths, they're just so erratic and wild. But that's actually also because when we tend to have an encounter with moths, we're encountering moths when they are being overstimulated by a source of artificial light. So in any case, that having these encounters with nocturnal animals under the influence of artificial light really affects things. So a single tree can be home to as many as 400 bats. So some hang out in leaves, some snuggle under bark. But when I learned this, it really brought home the concept of remnant habitat. So to consider that one tree can make a difference to an entire colony of 400 bats was pretty huge. And it also made me start thinking about how a single light turned off, or a lone neighborhood that pays attention to lights and turns off lights, can also provide sanctuary. And the story of the owl is an example of that. So areas of darkness are, in the area where I live on the East Coast, areas that are relatively dark are, in a sense, remnant habitat. And I think that we often don't think of darkness as habitat, but it truly is. And so another thing that I set out to explore and I wanted to learn about was foxfire. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with foxfire, but this is a photograph of bitter oyster mushrooms. And starting out, I thought that foxfire was a specific species, but it's the umbrella term used to refer to bioluminescent fungi. So the green, it glows neon green. So this is what bitter oyster looks like in light and what it looks like in the dark. And so I first encountered bitter oyster in the dark. And interestingly enough, I then realized that I did not know how to identify it in daylight. So I had an entire process of learning how to identify it. And I just wanted to share with you a passage from the book about bioluminescence. And I ended up finding a guide. So I think one of the challenges to exploring darkness and exploring night and having, responsible encounters with nocturnal wildlife is that it's hard to know how to relate to darkness, how to move through darkness. So I was fortunate enough to find a guide in my region who, first of all, taught me how to walk in the dark. So to do a pronounced heel-toe walk, because that makes it, you're less likely to trip over a root. So learning how to walk like that, having the patience to allow my eyes to adjust, not just by walking outside when I leave a lit room, but to allow myself to be outdoors and let nightfall while I'm there with it, to become comfortable. So just want to share a little passage from that. I asked my guide if he's seen a change in people after these walks, peculiar as they are. In the literal sense, I don't really see people at all, he says with a laugh. This is to him one of the most interesting things about night walks. After greeting strangers in low light, he typically never sees them again, though they almost always go on to spend hours walking around together. Still, those unseen have a presence. He quickly learns the cadence of their voices, the character-revealing insights they share from the dark, which grants each attendee a shroud of privacy, even when enmeshed in the crowd. The most memorable transformations he's observed have taken place among teenagers. I've had kids terrified of the dark. Shaking with fear. And once they see bioluminescence, they become entranced, he says. They shed fear. It's like they altogether forget it's something they were carrying. In front of me, I sense a tumble. Root, he shouts. Root, I say, turning my head to amplify the alert. Root, 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 vocal cords ping. Historically, people marked trees to guide them home. They dug braille-like pocks on trunks to help them feel their way along. It's an intimacy of place that my guide seems to have without causing tree damage. So acquainted he is with this landscape, and it is his familiarity that's allowing us to travel freely. Tonight, the familiar wilds of these mountains have been made strange. We're still a good journey away from the fungal discovery we're seeking, but we pause when we see a puddle of ethereal light beside the trail. It's surrounded by flecks of light that speckle the ground like paint splatter. He explains that it's mycelium in the process of consuming fallen leaves. If I turned a flashlight on, he says, this would just look like ordinary leaf litter. He picks up a handful of light and gives it to me. The leaves are cool and damp, well on their way to decay. Mycelium is really running right now, he says. I cannot see the teenager behind me, so I hold the glowing pile of mycelium up to announce it as an offering. The girl is the youngest of the group. She stayed in her father's car until the minute we left the parking lot. Cell phone light pointed directly at her eyes. In the dark, I've heard her emit a few grunts, indicating that she'd rather be somewhere else. But in this moment, she comes across as wholly present. She seems to be carrying a fear of missing out on cell phone time more than she's exhibiting a fear of the dark. But she sighs when she accepts the mycelium, as though she's traded something heavy for a puff of light. How beautiful, she whispers. We are, in essence, watching death become life. We are watching darkness being transformed into light. The teenager stares into the handful of alchemy before finally passing it on. Mycelium, she announces, letting the person behind her know what's coming, announcing wonder as she had previously passed on warnings. Mycelium, mycelium, mycelium. Each handoff is announced, connecting us to each other. We are no longer faces. We are no longer hands. We are all part of the darkness. Because in this forest, the glow of leaf litter is all that visibly exists. It moves through the night, tracing the path of our voices, like a luminescent cloud pushed by invisible winds. And so I share this in saying, to think about the readers that reached out to me that turned off their lights, to think about darkness as not being something to avoid, but rather something to embrace. I think the concept of darkness as having, not only dangers lurking, but wonders awaiting is a really powerful concept. And over again, it was that sense of discovery that I noticed people embracing when they turned off their lights because they were curious. And I think curiosity is such a powerful motivator. I think it's a really powerful motivator. And one of the things that I started thinking about were moon gardens. So nocturnal blooming flowers is almost something that turns the way that we think about the world on its head, because, when I typically think of flowers, and I think when most people do, we think of flowers as, being in fields of sunshine, butterflies around them hovering. But, we have entire, night blooming landscapes out there. And I set out attempting to find a moonflower like the one in this photograph. I'm more of a hunter-gatherer than a grower. So I set out asking some of my gardener friends if they might have moonflowers growing so that I could go and observe them. And to some people, watching a flower bloom in darkness might sound a little like watching grass grow, so not very exciting, but to me it sounded thrilling. Ultimately, I could not find anyone, but I mentioned this to a friend of mine who had accidentally planted a moon garden. And this had happened because she lives in a historic house, over 100 years old, and she is the kind of person who, if she's going to change a light fixture, she wants to have period appropriate light fixtures. So she ended up planting her garden in accordance to what she thought the original inhabitants of the house had there. And what they had were nocturnal blooming flowers, because the original inhabitants of her house lived pre-electricity in Southern Appalachia. So they would have planted these species as evening entertainment, as a nightly pleasure. And so she called me and she said, I actually have these night blooming flowers I'd never really realized or thought about. And so I was able to witness nocturnal blooming tobacco. And when she realized this, she also contacted me, and she was almost in tears. And she said, I went out and I had told her about hawk moths, because I had learned about hawk moths, which are moths that are the size of hummingbirds, so giant moths. And she went out and she said, as soon as I went looking for them, I found them. And she was amazed that they had been there the entire time. So again, surrounded by these wonders that we had no idea of. And so circadian rhythm is important. We talk about it in terms of sleep, but in learning about these nocturnal blooming flowers, I learned that as humans, circadian rhythm really affects many of our bodily functions, including our sense of smell. So it is actually around the time that night blooming flowers are just beginning to reveal themselves and relax in the darkness that our sense of smell rises, and that these flowers emanate their strongest fragrances. And it is an absolutely gorgeous meeting of the species. And I will also say that watching moths with nocturnal blooming flowers, wherever you are, if you've only encountered moths under the influence of artificial light, I think you'll be surprised by how serene the experience of watching moths in their natural habitat of darkness can be. And in moon gardens with nocturnal bloomers is a perfect place to experience that. So the last species that I explored was actually humans. And spending time with so many animals that depend on darkness really helped me absorb the fact that I too am an animal. And watching moths experience the stimulation of artificial light really helped me absorb how much I am affected by the stimulation of lights on screens and things like that. So humans are a light-making species. We are the only species that makes light. So I'm still not sure exactly how I came up with this concept, but I decided that if I was going to learn about humans and experience, I don't know, I was going to trace back the human relationship to artificial light, because I wanted to better understand my personal relationship to light. And also I found a lot of things about the human relationship to light pretty confounding. So I decided to learn how to make fire with a bow drill. So with sticks and my bare hands, I was able to make fire, and it was one of the most empowering activities I've ever participated in. So to make fire with only your bare hands and sticks and whatever's around you, you actually have to integrate with your specific ecosystem. You have to know which trees burn best. You have to really understand the landscape. In my area, you have to know which side of the mountain you're on. Are you on the south slope or the north slope? The south slope is going to have dry tinder. The north slope is going to have maybe more tinder fungus, which is a type of fungus that you can actually transport fire with. So you have to really know your environment, which was really amazing to me, because we think of light as light on, light off. So to have an experience that really brought home the energy that it takes to make light and what is consumed to make light was really powerful. So it was empowering beyond what I have time to share here, because I would love to talk a little bit with you all and answer questions if I can. But you know, in the process of making fire, I realized that early in the book, in that story that I wrote about fireflies, I had talked about, you know, I had been careful to close curtains to make sure that the light in my house wasn't going to trespass into the, you know, firefly habitat. But at that point, I started to realize that when I closed those curtains, I was actually wrapping that light around myself. I was in a container of light. And my living room, prior to researching this book, you know, 10 o'clock at night was pretty much as, it feels like it was high noon. It was Vegas in my living room. So in this process, I started to recognize that, you know, we think of light as on off because we live in an electrified world with switches. But in the natural world, there is an easing of light and there is an easing of darkness, dawn and dusk. And so now in my own house, it changed my relationship not only to darkness, but also to how I use light in my own space. So also, you know, we marvel over bioluminescent creatures, fireflies, for example, because they can make light inside of their bodies. But if other animals studied us the way that we study them, they would probably marvel over the fact that we can make light outside of our bodies. Because again, we are fire-making animals, and we are the animals that you know, create the light, and we are the animals that can turn the lights down and kind of tend the fire down. So fear of the dark, to turn fear into, you know, a concept of darkness as a wilderness of possibility, which is what I have come to think of it as being. I hope that when they read this story, which I have intended as a dark, positive adventure narrative, full of scientific marvels, but I hope that they will be inspired by the possibility of discovery. And so when you read this book, and I hope that you will, I hope that you will think about darkness as it exists directly around you. You know, ecosystems are specific to they're unique and specific to where we are, to specific places, and that is a beautiful thing. And darkness is a connector. And I'm grateful for this community and for conversations about valuing darkness, because I do think that we need more of those stories. So, you know, early on, it was mentioned that often people come to DarkSky because they have a neighbor who doesn't realize or is doing something that is creating light trespass, and they don't know what to do about it. So early on, when I was working on this project, one of my neighbors came to me and she said, "Oh, I am so glad that you are writing this book, because my neighbor just installed a new security light and I don't know how to talk to him about this light." It was right in her window. You know, she's trying to put up curtains. She's trying to figure out how to block out the light. And so I thought of her many times when I was writing this book, and I thought, wow, I really want to write a book that Kristen can just slip into her neighbor's mailbox. I want to create a story that she can just kind of slide in there, and that can be the introduction. And so at my earliest book event, I told this story, and at the book signing, a couple came up And they had not one, they had 2 copies of the book. And they said, you know, make this out to us. And then they handed me another one and they said, we need you to make this out to Dawn. And just right, to Dawn, turn out the lights. So Dawn got a message from me, slipped into his mailbox. I don't know Dawn, but I hope that it was received well. But again, you know, this is really an idea of figuring out how to create an invitation. So this is, you know, Night Magic, I think in general is a story of my journey to understand my relationship to darkness and this overarching relationship to darkness. And also, it's a great invitation to invite other people into the darkness with me, which hopefully people will feel that, because again, just kind of that positive, finding ways to positively talk about environmental challenges is extremely difficult. But I think that with light pollution, and, you know, focusing on this, again, not focusing on the light, but rather focusing on the darkness as a gift, as a place of discovery and gifts. I think that there is power in that. The way that I think about darkness has shifted, and that is now how I think of darkness. It doesn't mean that I'm not nervous when I set out, even sometimes in my own neighborhood. Another spoiler alert, there is a close encounter with a bobcat in the book. But again, darkness can absolutely harbor dangers, but darkness can also offer wonders yet unimaginable. And so that's what I hope the takeaway is. And I'll turn this back over to DarkSky International in case any of you have questions or thoughts that you would like to share. Thanks so much for listening. And I would love to hear what you think of the book. I hope that you'll find ways to help it support the work that you're doing wherever you are.
What a wonderful talk, Leigh Ann. You've had such a unique voyage of discovery in the darkness. And I'm so glad you wrote the book so that it can be shared with us all. I'm also pleased that you read the extract from the book because you've got a lovely voice of connecting. So I, for one, will be rushing out to buy my copy. And I'm sure many will do the same. You've got some questions to answer.
Okay.
Shall I get going?
Sure.
So the first question is, you saw a lot and had many travels for writing your book. What was your favorite interaction along your journey?
It's so hard to choose. You know, I often think the realization that there were glowworms in my neighborhood was pretty exciting. But you know, I was actually with my son, who was 12 at the time when that happened, and he couldn't believe how excited I got. I got very excited. But you know, now that we're talking about that, you know, one of my favorite interactions is probably just having a 12-year-old away from his screens accompany me on this adventure. And you know, that sense of community kind of over and over again. And just having, you know, it's sometimes I was in crowds of strangers, you know, hundreds of people sometimes, like at the Synchronous Firefly event, in total darkness, all of us kind of shuffling around together, and couldn't really see each other, but still kind of making our way together. And that was a really special experience. You know, people often gather to watch a sunset, and so together to be in the darkness was pretty cool.
Okay, thank you. The next question, this is probably volume 2 of your book. The next question is, any stories you can share that did not make the book?
Oh, okay. Actually, behind the scenes. Okay. Yes, there was actually going to be another chapter that I didn't write. I felt like it was important to end on humans and our relationship to, you know, tracing artificial light. But I did, with my same guide, with my same fire making instructor, I did a solo overnight in a leaf shelter that I made myself. And I had a fantastic experience. I slept extremely well. I was sleeping under leaves like a firefly myself. And it was really fantastic. And you know, I actually had an experience. I encountered I did encounter in a rural area, you know, I did have a stranger approach. It totally was fine. Actually, he was very nervous about me, far more nervous than I was about him. But you know, darkness, to think about darkness as a friend rather than a foe is a really powerful thing. And so in nature, a lot of times we think of darkness as nefarious, but in nature, oftentimes darkness actually aids predators, and times of high illumination, times of high illumination aids predators, and times of low illumination, so like when the new moon, it actually aids prey, because darkness is an avenue of escape. And so once you have acquainted with darkness, it just expands the world.
Thanks, Leigh Ann. So the next question goes this way. Many people on the call here are engaged in the mission of DarkSky. As a storyteller, what's your advice for creating and making engaging conversations to help us find supporters, partners, or more in our work?
Such a good question, such an important question, kind of the ongoing question, really. You know, I do think that finding ways to engage curiosity, again, I think that's incredibly powerful. And also, I think that there are some, and increasingly maybe, opportunities for people to have, you know, a guided night hike or a stargazing in a community park. You know, things like that I think are really meaningful for people. And, you know, in terms of those night experiences and figuring out how to acquaint with darkness in an intimate way, I think that those opportunities can really impact people and motivate them to you know, to foster darkness, because they want to make more discoveries. And when you start associating darkness with discovery, I think that is meaningful. And a lot of people I know are focused on night skies, and but also to consider having meaningful interactions with the wildlife around, just right on the grounds, just, you know, insects and owl prowls, and listening for owls, and having knowledgeable people teach you how to engage with night. I think that can be really helpful, and people get excited. People get excited, I think, about those opportunities.
Thanks, Leigh Ann. If I can add my comment on this, it's all about light and dark. And often the emphasis is too much on the light side, controlling the light. And what you're doing here is to adjust the balance, where we show, and you called it yourself, it's a gift, it's a wonder. So rather than talk about the one side of the equation, you give us the opportunity to talk about both sides. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Next question. How can we find out which night creatures or beings are native to our own area?
Oh, well, you know, a lot of times if starting out just from ground zero, a lot of times birding enthusiasts are acquainted with, you know, a lot of times birding enthusiasts are familiar with, you know, familiar with lighting issues and how that affects birds. And you know, birds are really connected to so many different species down the line. I find that people who are passionate about birds, and so birding organizations in your area would be a great place to start. So I think, you know, really just digging around and talking to nature knowledgeable people. If you know people who are fascinated by fungi, you could start, like, is there any bioluminescent fungi in the region? So just using your own contacts, I think that just kind of, you know, searching out and maybe even using, you know, I kind of created a pilgrimage for myself in the book. And so I think maybe even looking kind of at the pilgrimage that I kind of went on and thinking, okay, like, what owls are in this area? And so start there. Like, are there amphibians that might be, you know, what's going on in that regard? So I think that there are organizations and enthusiasts that can help with that process. And then also just to kind of find something to start with, which maybe Night Magic could kind of provide kind of a template, if not a map, because again, every place is unique, and that's what's fantastic and exciting. I mean, there are many species, especially nocturnal species, that are yet to be discovered. I do want to say, you know, the neon blue glowworms, recently in Brazil, a new species was discovered. So very exciting. All the time things are being discovered. You could discover something, and that's that's part of the joy.
Okay, that leads us to our next question. What will your next book be about? Any additional reading you would recommend?
Oh, I'm not sure what my next book is going to be about. I feel really dedicated to seeing this project through. And actually, I'm really the book that Ruskin brought up. I'm actually interested in. I'm going to have to read the Inner Clock. That looks like something of interest. That in terms of recommended reading, I feel like that looks like a good one.
Thanks, Leigh Ann. And if you want to extend your glowworm thing by including New Zealand, we can talk about how we can make that visit possible for you.
That would be fantastic. Full circle.
Oops, the questions have disappeared. Okay.
I
This
did
is
want
the
to
next-
also. Oh, I was going to also mention iNaturalist would be another great resource for people who are looking for nocturnal organisms specific to where they are.
Okay, the next question is, Leigh Ann, you're such a rainbow girl, the way that outdoors pulls on you. Did you ever go to rainbow gatherings?
Oh, that's actually fun. I have been to one rainbow gathering in my life. My brother-in-law is very involved in rainbow gatherings, and I have attended one in northern Wisconsin near the Apostle Islands, and it was a gorgeous landscape.
Thank you. The next question is, how did you help your neighbors address their fear of crime?
Oh, that's actually a really interesting question. It comes up again and again. So I live, and I do address this, I live in an extremely rural area. And so one of the things that's fascinated me is that people will put up a security light where there's no one around to see what's happening. And so where I live, if you have a security light, it almost is an indication that no one is there, because you know, most of the time where I live, you know, if people are home, like, they turn things off at night. But if you see a security light, that might mean that it's a vacation house or nobody's there, because if you're there full time, you're usually gonna turn it off. So, you know, the crime part of things is really fraught, and there are no easy answers. But I do think that we have some associations with light as safety that are really worth examining. And you know, that actually came to mind when I did have my close encounter with the bobcat. I actually had an impulse to run to my neighbor's security light because, and I was like, wait, this doesn't really make sense. I'm associating lights with safety. But in reality, that's not always the case. And again, in the natural world, you know, it's really, it's a tough question, and there are no easy answers, but I do think that, it's worth thinking about and looking into more.
Thank you. There is a workshop on this topic for those who are interested later on in the program. The next question is, will your book be translated into French or other languages? If so, when?
I am not sure, but I would love for that to happen. And if you have any suggestions to pass on to my agent, in terms of publishers, please let me know, and I will absolutely do whatever I can to make it happen. I would absolutely love that.
Okay, and this is your next question, final question from Anna Levin. It says, last weekend, I was at the Mayo DarkSky Festival, and me and my 13-year-old daughter went for a long night walk and found a bioluminescent beach. It sparkled as we walked, just as you said about wonders awaiting. Did you venture to the waters in your explorations for the book?
Oh, I'm so excited that you and your daughter got to experience that. And I did not write about that in my book. So I specifically and very intently focused only on my home region, kind of with this idea that, you know, I believe that wherever you are, if you invite darkness to come a little bit closer, you will find extraordinary things. But interestingly enough, years ago, I actually did experience the bioluminescent bay of Vieques, Puerto Rico, which is one of the brightest in the world. And back then, they would still allow you to swim in the bay. So I was able to swim in the bioluminescent bay, and it really was fantastic. And again, this is, you know, I didn't really know at the time, but all things kind of lead to the next thing. And I am just thrilled because I know that there are so many things that I still have to discover, and that you do too. So I go forth and discover, and I would love to hear about these discoveries, and I hope that you'll enjoy the book. Thank you so much for having me along and for joining me on the journey.
Thank you, Leigh Ann. The pleasure was all ours. And I think you got the topic for your next volume.
We'll see. Yes, we'll see. We'll see how it all comes together. I'm not quite sure, that's what makes it exciting.
Thank you. I think we move on from here to have we finished a bit early? No, just on time. So the next session is the global networking session. I'd strongly recommend people to join that. As I said earlier, it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with other people you've met before, and new people, and talk about this lecture. So to join that, you got to go to the community section in the event app. The options are available in language-specific discussion group, topic-specific discussion group, and just one-on-one networking. So all options are available to choose your preference. And thank you very much for joining us. The last I looked, we had almost 300 joining us for this session, which is wonderful. And look forward to a great conference, and see you again at the close in 24 hours' time. Thank you.